I think before we start our discussion, I wanted the opportunity to talk to you about sort of how we get here, right? I became a Los Angeles resident last week. So I'm thrilled to be here and the opportunity to commune with all of you. This is probably my third or fourth career. I practiced as a product liability defense attorney for 18 years. Then I was a deputy administrator of the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. Then I was at DOT, US DOT in Washington, DC for 5 years. Part of that time as the senior advisor to the administrator. And then I went to American University, which has led me to where I am today. The reason I'm telling you all of that is not just to say I have a long resume and can't keep a job, but I think how we come to transportation is based on our lived experiences, where we are, the places that we've been, who we communicate with, and how we move. Transportation is mobility, and mobility is freedom. Too often, those of us in the industry who are planning for transportation and who are involved in the movement of people only see things from our particular perspective. We look at things from how do we move the commuter and how do we move people during peak hours. We have to move off of that view and start to look at not the movement of the car or the train or the bus, but the movement of people. If we're solving problems and autonomous vehicles are to solve a problem, then the issue is to make it better than we have in the past, to create best-in-class transportation. And that includes also now looking at the disabled, the differently abled. How is that mother getting her stroller down the sidewalk? How am I getting from my front door into a vehicle? How are we moving about the communities and the cities that we live in? And our panelists today are operating in that space and making this world better for us and for our future. So I would like to start and ask them to introduce themselves one by one and give us a little bit about their background. Carlos.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day, but very enthusiastic to be here today. My name is Carlos Cruz-Casas. I'm an assistant director of the Department of Transportation and Public Works for Miami-Dade County, overseeing strategic planning. I know you're thinking that it's perhaps too long of a title and doesn't do justice what we do. I like to consider ourselves a mobility management agency as we manage and operate all traffic control devices, signals and sign, highway engineering, traffic engineering, transit planning, transit operation, paratransit, and even for-hire regulation for taxis and limos, and before the state preempted us, Ubers and Lyft. In short, my role is basically to bring mobility innovation, and while often confused with technology, it's more about how we address the problems that we have at hand. Looking forward to have this conversation here today.
Thank you. Isobel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Isobel. I lead the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles in the UK government. I'm a long-time transport policy person and a relative newcomer to the automated vehicle space. I think to kind of start to talk about what I think the role of government is to meet the challenge that you've talked about, Selika. My team is looking at the regulatory framework for automated vehicles to ensure that deployment is safe. We have a law commission review looking at the legislative framework, really to create a whole new regulatory environment for automated vehicles. And we have research looking to define what we mean by safe in this context, as well as public engagement programs to really kind of engage, get people engaged and get people understanding the technology. I think increasingly our role is also going to be looking at what demand needs to look like to ensure that the deployment happens to realize those benefits, not in a haphazard way, but integrated with wider transport networks and policy initiatives. And finally, we operate in terms of developing the sector. We've invested £250 million into R&D with the sector. We're looking to stimulate investment and jobs, and ultimately to have the supply chain within the UK to be able to meet our needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Rogelio?
Hey folks, my name is Rogelio Pardo. I'm the program director at Urban Movement Labs, where I work to help facilitate pilot projects between the city of Los Angeles and private mobility technology companies. And really the purpose of Urban Movement Labs is really to facilitate these pilot projects so we can take lessons and figure out how do these new technologies fit in our mobility environment in a way that actually helps address existing challenges? How do we address new challenges that may emerge? And how do we make sure that they're actually benefiting community members? I came to Urban Movement Labs after a decade in advocacy and transportation, traditional transportation planning and policy work. And I took this job as, somebody that's born and raised in LA, because I like to think that I'm not somebody that's distracted by shiny objects, and really am focused on how we can use new technologies to really enhance how people are able to access goods, how we move goods, and how we move people.
Thank you. Gene?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Gene Gurevich, I'm Director of Policy and Business Development for Mobileye. Mobileye, we're an Intel company. We're the autonomous vehicle division of Intel. We were acquired back in 2017. And what do we do at Mobileye? So we're a global leader in collision avoidance and autonomous vehicle technology. In terms of collision avoidance, we work with most of the major OEMs that you're familiar with. We're in over 65 million vehicles globally. So if you are in a car that has automatic braking, lane keep assist, forward collision warning, pedestrian collision warning, et cetera, more likely than not that it's powered by our chip. It's a computer vision based technology, AI. So in addition to collision avoidance, we are also a leader in autonomous vehicle technology, working with a lot of partners to enable autonomous vehicles. And the third pillar is data. And it's a lot of what I do, a lot of what I focus on at Mobileye. As our vehicles are going around everywhere, they collect a lot of road data. This data is crowdsourced, and it can really help cities, municipalities to enhance safety and improve efficiency.
So Gene, I want to start with you. As you talk about the work that Mobileye is doing, what's their viewpoint on autonomous vehicles and the sort of how they see them operating in cities and communities around the country?
Sure. So our view on autonomous vehicles is that we're heavily invested in this. This is where the future is going. We believe in it. We're investing a lot in it. And the societal benefits associated with EVs are really immense. On the safety side, on the mobility side, I think the future of AVs, it's coming and it's incredibly exciting. However, our view of AVs is also through a prism of collision avoidance. This is in our DNA. Safety is in everything that we do, from collision avoidance, autonomous vehicles to the data. And as we work towards AVs, we also should focus on collision avoidance as essentially stepping stones or paving the way towards autonomous vehicles. ADAS, collision avoidance technologies, it's proven, it's here. We need to have it adopted more broadly, and it can save lives today. And also, harnessing the data that's available now and continues to grow, that can be a really helpful tool in saving lives today and not wait for autonomous vehicles. As bright as that future is, it's going to take a number of years for us to get there, to see this widespread, ubiquitous adoption of autonomous vehicles. And there are things that cities and municipalities could be doing now to really save lives.
Thank you. Carlos, I think about how separate states and cities are addressing autonomous vehicles. And certainly when it comes to Florida and Miami in particular, it's probably one of the bullish places in the country when it comes to autonomous vehicles. What are you doing right now in Miami in that space?
Yeah. Excellent. So in terms of automated and autonomous vehicle technology and innovation, or in terms of the mobility, we're no strangers to that. We've been operating a fully automated people mover in downtown Miami for about almost 40 years. In fact, I think it would have been great for us to be there and see the reaction of someone getting into a vehicle 50 feet above the ground with no driver. And there was a time there was no phones, no computers, and nothing. And imagine that someone else was driving that for you. In the more modern days, right? So about 3 years ago, Ford partnered with Argo to start running systems in Miami, start mapping and testing their technology in the area of Miami, Miami Beach, and all that downtown area. What I can tell you is, the community has welcomed that in open arms. They see the benefits of that. I have stories from bicycle riders that they say how comfortable it was to ride a bicycle next to an autonomous vehicles, knowing that they were basically keeping in line with the rules and regulations of the road, and how the technology actually became better from 2018 to 2020, right? In addition to that, I know a couple of folks that have been able to enjoy, or at least participate in and experience the autonomous vehicle inside. And one of the things that it's starting to see is you actually look at the inside of the vehicle, you're riding on the back seat, the safety drivers in front of it, but you can see what the vehicle sees, right? And I think, to your point about collision avoidance, you cannot avoid a collision if you don't see it, right? And I remember, I don't know about you guys, but when I started driving many years ago, I remember my mom telling me, 20 ojos, man, that means 20 eyes on the street. And I'm like, I only have 2, but you know one who has 20 eyes in the street is the technology that we put on these vehicles to make sure that data comes in. So to me I'm really enthusiastic about the conversation, because again, it is an implementation of a solution of what we do. It has the potential to make it safer for us, for everyone out there. And sometimes we focus too much on the people inside the vehicle and their experience. And what we're trying to understand with Ford and Argo, and hopefully many more coming to Miami, is how does that impact and benefit the people outside the car, right? The people waiting at a stop sign, the people walking around there, people riding the bicycle and scooter, how does it benefit? So our focus is let the technology develop, let the experts in all this develop that, how we can explore and understand better how our community reacts to it and the benefit that we can bring to our area with the arrival of this technology.
It sounds very exciting. One of the cornerstones of the work that I do is in the area of equity in transportation. And so we see episode after episode in the United States, decades of negative impacts on certain communities within this country, or certain types of people who are moving about, whether you're on foot or on a bicycle, and sort of treated like a second-class citizen. But those issues aren't unique to the United States. And so I really wanted to ask Isobel to give us her perspective on issues of mobility and equity from even the UK point of view.
So I mean, I think we'd agree, and we see AVs as having a huge potential here. I think in particular, our government has a real focus at the moment on what they refer to as levelling up. And what that means is having a commitment to improve the amenities, investment, and services in those areas which are perhaps left behind at the moment, and all of the impacts that go with that for the citizens that live there. And as I say, we see AVs as really having huge potential in facilitating transport connections to those areas, and enabling people to reach more effectively, opportunities and training and everything that they need. I think what we need to be doing is demonstrating that potential and how that links to the benefits that can be realised. So, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations already here this week around fantastic projects that demonstrate exactly those benefits. So I think we can share the learnings from that and really build the business case for the deployments that we want to see, and how that flows through to the benefits.
Thank you. When you think about this nation and the different communities and cities, they're really not the same, right? What's happening in in a city in Texas may not be the same issues that a city in Pennsylvania is facing. But there are some things that may be transferable lessons from city to city as we move towards autonomy. And so Rogelio, I'm going to ask you, are there things that you think are lessons that we can use no matter where you live in the country as we begin to look at widespread usage of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I think in my work in piloting smaller technologies, autonomous delivery devices or different care management tools is really just that, the importance of piloting tools and technologies in a local context. Piloting technologies, whether it's AV or otherwise, really allows us to understand what are the different challenges of deploying this technology, AV or otherwise, in the unique imperfections of every different urban context across the country. Pilots allow service OEMs and mobility service providers to understand what challenges they can run on before they can plan on running into before scaling up. It allows them to understand what new challenges may emerge so they can troubleshoot within a smaller geography before really rolling out. And it helps public agencies kind of collaborate and help understand what else needs to accompany these technologies to really develop a safe ecosystem for all roadway users, not just AV providers. And I think pilot projects, more than anything else, really provide an opportunity to socialize new technologies within communities and really create spaces where community members are able to engage and understand what these new technologies are, touch them, interact with them, understand how they're going to be working in their communities, so that companies, governments, and communities can kind of work together and figure out, how is this new technology going to help the community meet its goals? How are we going to make sure that it's actually bringing benefits? How do we make sure that just to wrap that up is, it's important to have pilot projects be collaborative experiences that include the community, to avoid kind of the top-down rollout of transportation infrastructure or of transportation technologies that was kind of done 100 years ago, right? So how do we ensure that this collaboration helps usher in a new era of transportation that really kind of helps address the challenges that were left from the past and move forward? One of my colleagues, Jorge, who's sitting up front, always says, we have the opportunity to really build out a dream for mobility moving forward. But if we're not careful, it really could be more of a nightmare. And there's not a whole lot of room for the future to be in between.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want you to be able to comment as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, right? Can you hear me? We don't have to wait for this technology to come in, experience the benefit, right? And we particularly, we talk about pilots. One of the things in Miami is a network of what we call a community liaison program, where we're working with a nonprofit. We're working with a nonprofit organization. I need another mic. You haven't? That's kidding. So we're working with a nonprofit organization to basically cover the cost and hire people from the community for them to experience the technology, and for them to experience a proxy, if you will, right? And I mentioned that because we have a on-demand transit program with a minivan, which, if you think about it, other than saying hello and goodbye to your driver, the experience of hailing the car, waiting at the location, and being picked up and taking to where you need to go, it is the same as the future of AV, right? So understanding that and getting them to kick the tire, to explore it, to engage with it, learn from them, and say, if this were going to go to your community, how you want to see it deployed, it is critical. And I think some of the things that we can actually identify and early on it. And to your point, Rogelio, too, is that, what we're learning is a great city for AV. It is a city that is great for people walking and biking, right? You do protected bike lanes, you do great amenities for people walking and biking. The AVs basically will have the easiest time of their life running around. So that we can have a win-win here when we build a city for us today, a city for us tomorrow, and have technology and help us move more efficiently and safer through our area.
we're kind of talking about the positive side of it, but I think one of the harms that has come from just bad transportation decisions before this is not calling out some of the ills that have existed in the past and saying, well, we did X and it was wrong, or it was bad, or it didn't work, and we shouldn't do it again. So, you know, it's great to say, let's try these pilots and let's see what can work in the future. But, you know, do any of you have, and I'm throwing this out to you collectively, examples of decisions that have been made from a transportation standpoint in communities and cities that may have had some negative impacts? And then so at least we're calling out bad conduct and hoping that we don't do things like that in the future.
I'll jump in. I think on the regulatory side, I think what the industry needs is a predictable regulatory environment. What we've seen so far from the federal government is a lack of action. And what that has triggered essentially is states getting nervous and enacting their own regulations and rules. If we move in that direction, what we're going to have is a patchwork of laws, which has a potential of killing this entire effort and all the societal benefits that go along with it. If you can't bring your vehicle from California to Oregon, from California to Arizona, that is a problem. So we do need federal leadership on this, and everything else, I think, you know, will fall into place.
Anybody else willing to share their issues and concerns?
Isobel, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think answering that point, certainly we're in my team looking to do exactly that and create really a forward-looking regulatory framework. And I think for us, that needs to be in place before we see widespread rollout to really, you know, set that environment and enable the technology to come forward and to do so within that kind of stable environment. And I think that's coupled. So the regulatory framework at the national level, but that's not to diminish what really does need to happen at the local level. And it needs to be, I think, both.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in, of course, too, right? Well, one of the things that we see, and we heard that the theme today too is, you know, we have worked in the transportation industry sometimes in a silo, right? And particularly managing traffic, right? And basically increasing the throughput of people inside our car, you know, has been kind of our kind of gold standard for us managing the space, right? And one of the things that I mentioned is we need to take a step back, and not because we have AVs or connected vehicles that can actually move people, move cars faster, quicker, and more closer together. It is something that we want, right? Going back to a single occupancy vehicle, going back to a zero occupancy vehicle moving around, it is not necessarily what we want to put out there. And I say that because, you know, we need to bring into context what's the city that we want to live in. I think it was a conversation earlier today, and not trying to repeat that mistake of providing better benefits for someone driving alone than someone in a shared use car or in a transit bus or something like that. So to me, is technology is one thing. We'll put that aside for a minute. Let's figure out the business models, figure out what works for our community, and then use technology to help us deliver on that. But first, we need to make sure that the goals are aligned with our community and what we want to achieve.
Yeah, sorry, just to add, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And one other thing that we have done at a national level is put out our future transport urban strategy, which aims to set some principles for deployment in order to meet those policy needs. So I think, I mean, I know that when I say local, I should say that's at a rather different scale to local in the US. I mean, our kind of local authorities at a county or district level, and I recognize you're talking about whole states, but we do know that document has been well received with our transport authorities.
I just want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about public perception and public sentiment. I mean, we can build it and we can build it safely, but if the public doesn't want it and doesn't understand it, we're kind of stuck. If I get to be in charge for the day, often say that I would love a Super Bowl commercial, an opportunity to explain en masse to the world, frankly, what ADAS is. Let's use these terms correctly. Let's say what means what a vehicle is capable of, and what autonomous vehicles are and what they're capable of. And the fact that no person can purchase an autonomous vehicle today to drive anywhere on the road in the United States of America. But how do we really, other than me having the queen for a day mentality, how do we address public sentiment and perceptions in our community? And how do we get the public to be on board with the industry? I'll start with Rogelio on that one.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of work. And frankly, it has to be kind of a grassroots effort of going out and engaging different communities. And different communities have different concerns and different goals. So it's how do we frame these technologies within the context of their goals, their needs, their desires. And that really can vary from community to community, whether it's really doing the messaging in a different language or even, messaging being addressing completely different issues. I think in Los Angeles, we have a patchwork of neighborhoods. I can imagine going somewhere in South LA and somewhere on the West Side, your approach to discussing AVs is going to be very different. So how do we do that grassroots work at the city level or at the community level so that you can kind of build that political will and political support for really introducing new technologies into our communities?
Carlos, do you think, sort of tackling the public perception and sentiment thing, is that a government responsibility, an industry responsibility? Whose job is it to engage with the general public?
That's a really good question, right? So I'll tell you first is what are we trying to achieve with this, right? What are the outcomes and the goals that we're trying to do, right? And it's a very hard task to do, and it is not unique to AVs, right? We're still trying to convince our general population that riding transit and buses and train is the way to go, right? Moving people in the same direction at the same time in an ultimate shared vehicle is the best way to go. So you ask who's responsible? I'll say all of us. Whether you're private sector, you're public sector, at the end you're part of the community. You're part of the beneficiaries of what's going on here, and I think we need to work together on it. In a sense that perhaps the public sector partnering with local organizations. I'm fortunate enough that in Miami-Dade County, we open our doors and we said, we want to work with a transit advocacy group. We want to work with the community. And it is always, in the past has been like more contentious conversation, but ultimately making sure that we plan with and for the community, it is a way to go. Where the private sector comes in is that you need to be open to the feedback. Right, you need to be open. If we are going to ask the community, here's what's going on. I want you to trust in this new technology coming in, or the information I've been telling you. For us to build that trust is that it is a two-way communication, and they provide feedback to us that we provide it to you, and say how we can work together toward making sure that we're moving in the right direction that is aligned with the goals of the community. So again, it's a roundabout way to say. There's nobody's at center in this conversation. I think everyone in this room, everyone in this stage, everyone needs to be part of this, because we need to understand not the technology, not the what we're putting out there, but what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and how this is allowing us to get there faster, sooner, and safer, right?
And I think one of the things that we should be mindful of, and I can say this having sat on the DOT side at the federal government level and at a state level, your friendly neighborhood legislator is not the person on the street. If you're talking to them and you're trying to convince them, they're not having daily experiences that regular folk have. Mm-hmm. And the person sometimes who says, I'm the neighborhood whatever, may not be. They've just designated themselves that, while real folk are trying to figure out how to get to and from work. So I think we need to meet people in their spaces and places and have real frank conversations. And of course, I was going to turn it over to you for your.
Sure. I mean, I'd like to provide a industry perspective on that, and I agree with everything that Carlos had said. Part of our philosophy, as I mentioned earlier, is that collision avoidance will essentially pave the way towards autonomous vehicles. That's part of our model. That's part of our philosophy. If you think about it, very few people have a problem driving in a vehicle with automated features such as automatic braking or lane keep assist, right? Those are, no-brainers. People get in, they're not nervous. But if you look at polls with regard to people's opinions about getting into autonomous vehicle, it's like, whoa, hold on a second. Over half the, people polled are saying, no, I have significant concerns. So from our perspective, as we have greater and greater adoption of collision avoidance features, what it does is validates the technology for AVs, and it also validates public perception. So I think it's important that we take the path that is part of our view, and I think that will definitely help both on the technology and a public perception side.
So Mobileye is collecting a significant amount of data. What's the story from that data? I think one of the issues here is, as an industry, we talk to each other and we're not talking to people outside of the industry. So we have to tell our story. What's the story coming out of the data from Mobileye?
So a couple of things. So one is a lot of our road data that's collected by vehicles equipped with a Mobileye are meant for developing autonomous vehicle maps, but there's also very practical uses for this data today for cities and municipalities. So if you think about it, our vehicles or vehicles equipped with Mobileye are going around everywhere. They're crowdsourcing this data, and some of this data includes near misses, lane markings, a pavement condition, a location of street signs, street lights, etc. It's aggregated, and this is critical information that can be used by cities, municipalities to enhance safety now. If you think about Vision Zero communities, these are all tools that can be utilized, particularly now with the infrastructure bill being passed. Maybe more of these programs can be better funded and really tackle the problem of safety in a way that we're leveraging tools that are available now and not having to wait for autonomous vehicles to get here.
So this is another question for the entirety of the panel. What should cities be doing to get ready for autonomous vehicles? We've talked about a whole number of things, but from a city government standpoint and a readiness standpoint, when the technology is perfected, what should they be doing? And I'll turn it to you, Isobel.
I would say looking now at how they want technology of all kinds, but automated vehicles in this context to fit within their networks, where their problems are, where their gaps are, and be engaging actually with industry now to start shaping the products as they come forward. Because otherwise industry will deliver what they deliver, and those conversations are going to be really important to make sure that that the products are relevant. And I think my team in the UK, I would like to see our team develop to start enabling those partnerships and those conversations to be happening. I mean, they are happening in some places in the UK, but I think that there's more to be done there to really bring that supply side and demand side together to create a forward look.
Rogelio?
I think three things come to mind. The first one is setting the goals for the mobility network for each city, and ideally putting people at the forefront of that. And how do we make sure that we are bringing technologies in to support mobility of people, not bringing setting goals to bring new technologies in and then have people work around that. The second is thinking about the ecosystem of kind of the mobility environment. So yes, there's road lane markings, et cetera, but also what other data sets are necessary. I think Los Angeles has a really strong goal of coding the entire curb, all their curbside regulations and curbside markings, which would help EVs understand the context of the environment that they're driving in. So thinking, kind of outside the box and what other data sets will help AVs operate in an urban context. And then lastly, really community engagement and start having these conversations with community champions or trusted community voices and community-based organizations that can help spread the word and kind of tap into community networks that the city might not necessarily have access to due to, you know, a lack of past engagement or a lack of trust in general.
Carlos?
But I think Rogelio took my notes and he was reading from it. But yeah, that's you know, it's on point. And to me, is really the autonomous vehicle technology. It is not necessarily the mobility solution, but it's the tools that can help us deliver a mobility solution in a better way, right? So understanding first about how you want your city to look like, what are you prioritizing in your streets, how you want those things to move, and then add the technology to it to be able to deliver in a better way. So I've mentioned this before, but you know, we don't have to wait until then to build more protected bike lanes. You know, let's get on that right now, and let's make sure that we build a city that works for us today and for the AVs moving forward. And to mobilize point of view, I really like this idea about the data and how we can actually act on it, right? I would love right now, you know, nothing more than if an autonomous vehicle or a car that knows it's supposed to be a stop sign on the corner of Spring and 4th Street and he's not there, to immediately let me know, because it's a live or dead situation that we need to address quickly, right? So, but for us to be able to do that, I need to have a strong asset management system and knowing where my information and resources are. You know, Miami-Dade County is a place that is bigger than some states, not necessarily bigger than California. That's a stretch, but it's very big. And we have millions of signs that it is very hard for us to understand exactly where they are. If we actually have a better understanding about that countywide, and then we can create a partnership when we have that information coming in, we can act quicker on it. And I tell you, and I promise you that once I tell the community, you know, these vehicles are not only running around and helping us move people through the community, but also giving us real-time information that can help us act better, more efficiently, and target our resources, so we don't have to spend additional money going around and do that. So I think there's a lot of those things that we can be able to do now to get ready for it, but we don't have to wait for it. We can actually start now.
I hope that in the end of the day that government can move that quickly, because you may be able to spot and assess that there's an issue. On the flip side is what's government's response to correct it. And you know, from my legal background, usually that takes a few lawsuits for government to finally figure out what their response time should be. And that'll change in our new mobility and our new paradigm. As we talk about autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of things going on in this space. We have robot delivery. And if we look at new mobility, we have scooters and more bicycles on our roadways. And then we'll have autonomous vehicles moving people all around. And as I started my conversation, one of the first things we do, our first mobility, is to walk on a sidewalk. Now we have a robot delivery, we have scooters, we have bikes, ride shares up and down our sidewalks. There's a lot of demand for the sidewalks in our communities and cities, and that will only increase with more widespread automation. What do we do about that?
First, I must say, John, I think that's cute to have Coco bring some drinks to the stage here, right? No, but to me, it's first, right? Let's talk about scooters parking on the sidewalk, right? There's a lot of complaints about that on the streets, and they're saying they don't belong there. I'm like, well, you know, it is a clear indication that we don't have the space for the scooter to be parked, right? That's the first thing, right? And in Miami-Dade County, our sidewalks are too narrow. I'm definitely jealous of LA, and you have like 30 feet of sidewalk, right? Having a scooter in the middle of the sidewalk doesn't bother me, right? But in addition to that, to your point is, we are at an inflection point right now. We're at a moment that we need to decide all these things that we put in pressure on the curb or on the sidewalk, do they belong there, right? You know, we made the assumption that moving forward, yes, we need to accommodate taxi, drop-offs and pickups, Ubers and Lyft, the Postmates, Uber Eats, all that, then scooters and then bike shares, and then the delivery bots. And we also forget that by adding bike lanes, we're sometimes removing curb. So now is a really interesting conversation about what does belong to the curb. And then once we have that clear out, and you know, we're partnering with the Miami Parking Authority to not only identify those things, but once we have a better understanding of what belongs there, how we can manage it more effectively. this curb management idea, it really needs to be part of how we manage our streets and really understanding that. And then the other aspects about the delivery bots and all that, it's interesting. Do they belong on the sidewalk or do we need to push them to the street? Conversation that I don't have the answer today, but by doing pilots, understanding and getting that information back can help us get there.
So when the pandemic started, and at the time I was in Washington, DC, I was walking on the roadway one day and here came a Starship robot getting ready to cross the street. And there was a couple with their dog and the dog lifted its leg on the Starship robot delivery. And then this little boy tried to kick it. Part of this is they had no idea what it was. It was moving about the city at that time, really more in a test phase. We see KiwiBot is, I think, on 21 campuses across the country, but this is a reminder to the industry that we really have to do better when it comes to educating people on what's out there, what it's doing, what the capabilities are, because the last thing we want is the dog to lift its leg or the little boy to kick this technology that's on our roadways. Isobel, I wanted to ask you, because we spent a lot of time talking about what's happening here in the United States. Do you see those same demands increasing on the curbs in the UK? And then what's the philosophy or how are you addressing that there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really live debate. And I mean, this is rather boring because we all agree with each other. We need to try harder to have a fight. But kind of building on what Carlos says, I suppose there's a question about how much everything that's going on in this ecosystem enables us to think differently about sidewalks. I'll use local language. And whether, road space can be given up if we're successful in a lot of the things that we're talking about. So I think things feed back and around in a circle. So ultimately we might end up thinking differently, as I say, about, is there a different space that we need to define and how can we enable that?
That's a good point. And I'd like Rogelio and Jean to weigh in. During COVID, we saw the use of sidewalks in a way that we hadn't seen in the country for a very long time, if ever in certain cities, where we had all these restaurants taking over sidewalks because we needed to be outside. But so what's your viewpoint on the curbs and how curbs are being handled, or we're looking at them when it comes to new autonomy?
Yeah, I think the demand on the curb really, ideally, we use this last year as a learning experience and really challenge to how we think about the curbs. Yeah, there's a lot of demand in lots of different uses, whether it's micromobility or delivery robots, pedestrians on the curb today. But the question maybe is not, do they need to be there, but do we need more curb space? And to Isobel's point, it's instead of compressing everything on the curb, it's why don't we expand and take away some of that right away from vehicles? And I think the real big obstacle to having that really difficult conversation is getting to a place where agencies and communities at large can think about the right of way and the space between curbs in a different way than we see it today. And I'm curious if, Jean or Carlos, do you think maybe introducing AVs might, kind of give people different ideas of maybe I don't need to own a vehicle. Rideshare kind of started that conversation and letting people think maybe I don't need my own car. Obviously, that results in an uptick of VMT, which is a challenge. But could AVs kind of avoid that and provide a different ownership model that allows us to rely on less right away for vehicles?
So no, it's a great point. So you could see how with widespread adoption of autonomous vehicles, these vehicles would be fleet owned. And essentially picking up, dropping off, constantly private ownership of vehicles would be reduced. So there would be potentially significantly less demand for parking, right? So you were talking about, curbs, right? So if we don't need parking along the road, or at least not as much, that's a space that could be utilized for different purposes that we just outlined. So I think the opportunities are vast, and we just need to really think about, what changes will occur in the coming years, and not just go afloat, but think about how do we manage that? How do we ensure that the interests of the people that we want the autonomous vehicle revolution to benefit the most, how do they benefit from, from all of that? And I think that curbside is just one of those potential benefits to cities, a better utilization of the real estate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you talk about the movement away from some of this parking,
Yep.
I can say, having been a regulator, it's an intravenous drug for communities and cities across the country. It's how they make their money. I mean, Washington, D.C. is the size of a spit. $324 million a year they receive in vehicle traffic fines and violations and parking. It's a tremendous amount of money that you're asking cities to give up. I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying is we're almost 10 years too late for the conversation because they have to find different ways to make up that revenue and maybe find that they don't need to kind of continue to pull dollars from their citizenry over something that feels more than a punishment as opposed to a service. But back to your point of who will be served best by autonomous vehicles and looking at the future, I'd like each one of you to comment about who you think will best be served in the new city and in the new community. Rogelio, I'll start with you.
I think it depends on how we design the ecosystem around AVs and how are we designing a system that supports people or that supports AVs. If it's the latter, then I think we're going to end up where my colleague really doesn't want to go, which is a nightmare scenario where you have elevated crosswalks and people are wearing sensors so that AVs are aware of where they're at. Ideally, that's not the solution, and we have more of a scenario like Carlos mentioned, where we have, very well designated right away for people bicycling or people walking, et cetera. So in the best solution, we all win. In the worst case, people in AVs.
Gene?
I believe it's going to be three categories of people. One, elderly. I think the growing elderly population could be significant beneficiaries of this technology, being able to stay in their homes longer, maintain their independence, go to their appointments, go to a pharmacy. So I think that group could truly benefit from this technology. Then community folks with disabilities, right? So there are millions of individuals that are skilled, that have education, that the only reason that they don't work is because it's cost prohibitive to get from point A to point B, to go to their work. So I think Uber has, and Lyft and others have made progress in that, but still the most expensive part of those services is still the human driving the vehicle. So if you take the human out of the equation, I think transportation could become a lot cheaper. So I think the community folks with disabilities could benefit tremendously. And then really the economically disadvantaged communities, folks that live in transportation deserts, I think they could really benefit from these technologies. Again, once there's widespread adoption of these, but until then, because this is my one takeaway, if you would, is let's not wait for that. I think the industry is working on it. I think the regulators are working on it, but there's still things that we could be doing now, really leveraging important data and really equipping vehicles with technology that exists today. I think it's going to be critical.
Isobel?
Yeah, I mean, really all of the above. But I'll add something we've talked about in the last day as well. I think there's the potential to make certain journeys and safer for women in particular. Again, in the UK, I can't speak to the US, but actually I think Uber has been helpful for women to know that they can access a ride independently, for example, on a night out. But certainly, we still see examples of women not wanting to get into a vehicle alone. And so I think that's an obvious addition that I'd make.
I wanted to go against that just to keep things interesting, but it's hard, right? So but I want to say this, right? One of the things that we learned is when the pizza delivery guy can no longer go 3 flights of stairs to deliver your pizza to your door, that means you need to come downstairs and get it, right? So I'm just put that aside as a perhaps we need to rethink some of the businesses around that. But if we do things right, let's assume the technology works. Let's assume the street is safe. Let's assume that the infrastructure is safe, right? Let's assume that people have more freedom and mobility because now they don't have to drive and they have opportunities to get around. There's also an opportunity for us to enhance the customer experience, right? You know, the fact that a driver doesn't need to drive the vehicle doesn't mean that the person cannot be inside and become an ambassador for your city, helping people with limited mobility, helping people that needs some additional guidance to be able to do around. So there is an opportunity for us to reutilize that, you know, that's the support, the labor, the staff, the people to make sure your experience in this shared mobility, because I'm going to assume all these vehicles are going to be shared. It is something that it makes you want to use it and experience it better.
So I got to put in my 2 cents like I've been doing all along. I write on mobility and equity, and I think I've probably just recently done my 15th article in Forbes.com. And one of the things that I try to stress as much as possible in a classroom or when I sit on a panel is taking us outside of our personal experiences and thinking about grandma who can't get to the doctor for maintenance care all the time. So she only sees the doctor in acute and critical condition. If there was an autonomous vehicle to take grandma to and from the doctor, she still had her autonomy in that way, but the autonomous vehicle is helping her to have regular maintenance care. The possibility is, as Michelle Peacock said this morning, that grandma might live longer. When people who are in urban settings in public housing, where there's no good transportation, but that's where we've stuck our public housing, now they'll have access to transportation that takes them to jobs, that takes them to school, that brings either them to sources of good food or good food sources to them, the things that are missing from our communities. I mean, we've had examples throughout COVID where people haven't been able to get a vaccine should they choose to have one, not really because they don't want it, but they don't have physical access. And for those of us who can move around our communities, it seems like a no-brainer. But for somebody 5 miles or 10 miles without adequate transportation seems like they're crossing the Mojave Desert. So I think it's a win-win for society at large when we have autonomous vehicles, because even if it's not taking you or me around, it's benefiting someone else in our community, which in the end benefits us overall. I want to turn it to each one of you to give some last minute remarks because I see that our time is ticking down. And I'll start with Isobel.
Thank you. I suppose really my parting thought is an invitation to engage with the UK. We're keen to connect with the US companies. We're keen for our companies to connect with US companies and US lawmakers, and we're keen to learn from each other. So I've had some fantastic meetings already. I'm sure I will have more tomorrow. And it's been great meeting everyone here. But yeah, that's an invitation to get in touch.
Thank you. Rogelio?
I think I would say sharing and thinking about how we can bring agency leaders and industry leaders together, similar to kind of how the Open Mobility Foundation has come together to figure out how do we develop standards for mobility data specifications or curve data specifications, and do the same so we can have consistent approaches to rolling out AVs in the future.
I think we live in a time. This is incredibly exciting to be, part of the transportation world right now. I think the changes that are taking place right now are really incredible. Very excited to be part of it. But it's important to prioritize, right? What's important to us, right? So I think safety has to be the focal point, and enhanced mobility, and try not to focus on too many things. Let's get this right. I think we really have an opportunity that can bring tremendous amount of societal benefits, and this is really our time to do great things.
Phenomenal. Not much more to add there. I think there's an opportunity, and we together can make sure that we're going in the right direction. The last thing I can probably tell you is, and I'll be remiss if I don't mention this, John, so you have to excuse me, but I would love to see you all guys coming to CoMotion Miami in the spring. I think it's another phenomenal conversation, and it's going to be some AVs driving around. So if you want to see and get on it and have the experience coming on, and we'll be welcoming you there. Thank you.
I want to thank the panel for being here and for the audience being here today. I want to leave you with this. It's Thanksgiving next week. As you sit at the tables with your family and friends, tell them the real story of autonomous vehicles and how it can improve their lives. Thank you very much.